Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking to actor and producer Lucy Liu all about her movie Rosemead. And in talking about Irene as a character, when we first meet her in the film, she's gone through so much in terms of losing her husband, and her son's struggle with mental health has kind of really moved a lot faster and a lot deeper. And I was interested for you in how that approached the way that you developed her as a character, kind of either just coming straight in at that point or really thinking specifically about who would she have been even 6 months before to then suddenly be in this particular place.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, this story happened in 2015 and the article was written in 2017. So it was a very, all the confluence of losing her husband, both of them had been diagnosed with cancer, and that created obviously an incredible stress that then triggered her son's schizophrenia. So, she went into remission, but then shortly thereafter, she found out that she had cancer again. And I think that all of that, the tension of that created this tragic ending. And I think that there could have been a different way forward. And I really think that's why we made this movie, to make sure that it was seen and that our community and other communities can feel, safe enough to talk about what's going on behind closed doors.
And in the way that you play her, we kind of really see that everything comes from this place of love and just wanting to protect her son. And, her own health diagnosis is almost more damaging to her in terms of, what if I can't look after my son anymore? What if I can't protect him? And I just wanted to ask about the way that that really shaped a lot of playing her for you in the movie.
The beginning of this movie to me and the end is all about love. It's a love story and it is an intense one. And that is the way that I was able to shape my character. And I think that Lawrence also came in with that same feeling. Like, he really wanted to protect his mother as well. And I think the psychotic episodes that he was having did not help him to see outside of that. So he became very myopic and paranoid. And in that way, we were able to create this, I guess, the feeling of love, but also the missing of how they were actually communicating with one another. And that lack of, honesty for fear of, making things worse created this vortex. And I think that they were both sliding down that vortex, in the end. And I think she was trying to fix and solve the puzzle. And really, it's not that simple. And I think the lack of advocacy she had from the healthcare community did not help her, because she really was ignorant about what the facts were about schizophrenia.
And we really see her trying to shoulder the weight of everything herself. And she doesn't even confide in anybody around her specifically about everything she's going through with her son as well. And how did you kind of feel that compounding a lot of the emotion and just a lot of that inner feeling for her throughout?
I think that she was a very courageous woman who had a great deal of fragility because of her condition, her medical condition. But I think that her will and her intensity of protection and love for her son really kept her alive. And I think those two things that are opposing, that tension, and that it really tethered her to staying alive and, staying the course. And I believe that when she found her son, when he had gone missing for a long time, she really believed that this was going to be okay. And when she saw that it wasn't going to be okay, and without that information, she kind of was not able to see a way forward.
And even I love what you just described about these opposing forces, where her body has this fragility, but her soul has this real strength, because you can see it in the way that you play her as well, because we see the way that her body just like has this exhaustion and she kind of feels it on a cellular level inside of herself. But then you see the way that she tries to move a little bit bolder and sit up a little bit straighter for her son, because he doesn't know everything that's going on with her health wise. And how did that shape the physicality of it all for you?
I think that the physicality came from the language, and I started with the dialogue, and not just the Mandarin Chinese, but the English was very crucial, because I think that the ability for her to show some of her, I guess, porousness and vulnerability was the inability for her to express herself completely the way that she did in Chinese. And that also brought in that physical fragility, because it's a desire to be heard and to understand. And there's just this wall, that's not able to be permeated because of the medical language or because of just time running out. And I think that urgency creates this very slippery way forward.
And with what you were just talking about with speaking Mandarin and kind of using language so specifically between Mandarin and English, that's also your first language. And I've heard you say that it kind of really connected you to playing her in a very different way to any of the other roles that you've played before. And what was the intimacy that you found in this role?
When I was able to really dial in on the language, and there was this strange secretion from the past that came forward. And I think it was very similar to being a child again, which is wonderful, but also absolutely terrifying. And that feeling of being little really flowed through Irene, because in some ways she was so small in this world. And it felt like everything was getting smaller and smaller for her, and the world was getting bigger, and she was unable to hold on. She did not have the ability to grip onto anything that was going to stay. And that really reminded me so much of, watching my own parents try to navigate, the world around us, which was quite small growing up in Jackson Heights, Queens. But seeing that made me feel, I guess, this sadness as a child for how they were being spoken to or how they were being received, even at the grocery store. And I brought that into my relationship with how Irene was in the world as well.
Yeah, because also we see this really beautiful friendship that she has with Kylie and the two of them having moved to the States together. And there's just this intrinsic history. They both own their own businesses. And when they walk into each other's place of work, they just immediately jump into doing tasks for each other. Nobody has to ask permission. Nobody has to ask for help. And how did the two of you want to really just build that intrinsic history together?
Such a wonderful, by the way, great pronunciation, great tone work. Yeah, Jennifer is very, very talented and speaks the language fluently. And there is a shorthand when there's a cultural connection. And we were able to do that, seamlessly and make it natural. And I think that's what friends do for each other, regardless of what language you speak or what culture you come from, right? And there's a facility in friendship, which I think is beautiful because you show that connection, but also you show that her friend says, well, you sound like a foreigner, So even within her own friendship, there's this feeling of being outcast because you are doing something that the school is asking you to do. And I think Irene really tried to follow the rules all the way into the end. She even called the police at the end. And I think there's something really heartbreaking about that, because even though she did everything she was told, it just wasn't working.
And within that friendship as well, that's the first time that she's able to actually talk about, yes, my son has schizophrenia. He's been seeking help for the last year, because every time it's kind of bought up around her, she tries to just downplay it and suppress it and be like, everything's fine. We're managing it. It's all good. And how did you feel that things opened up for her a little bit differently once she's finally able to confront saying it out loud for the first time?
I think it was a very delicate balance. And I think it's terrifying that she was able to say that in a way, because that meant she had nothing left on the table, and I feel like when she says at the end that she doesn't want to be remembered, there's a feeling of how stark she must have seen things in a way that was, you know, horrifying for me as a person living that for her and knowing that this was a real woman who wanted to be, unremembered. It's not a word, but to take yourself and take your life away and to disappear yourself. That is a really painful place to be, you know? And I think that it must have been a very, very lonely moment for her to know that there was no way out except for the one that she chose.
It is. And, even at the beginning, she struggles to even confront walking into the therapist's office and listening to the things that her son is talking about. And again, it just feels like such a monumental thing for her to do, to take that first step and walk in, to the point where she doesn't even knock on the door because she kind of almost doesn't know if she's going to turn
Right.
around and walk straight out. And I wanted to ask about, what you felt it really took for her to do that in the first place.
I really think she wanted him to be cured. And I think there was no easy fix. You know, it's not about healing, it's about process. And when that happened, I really think it was a brave choice for her and a very big move. And it was dangerous, because the unknown is so dangerous. There's no, no one there to hold your hand and bring you in and lead you in. And I think that the grace that she was able to, I guess, bring to what she did and how she did it was something that was important to me, because I don't want this woman to be remembered as someone who was a monster or somebody who didn't love. She did things because she really believed she was making the right choice.
And there's so many little details of showing that love in different ways. One of the moments that I thought was really beautiful is when she's with her son and he's having a really bad moment and he just kind of lays his head in her lap and you're touching his head and you're kind of like rubbing his back. And it's like, this is your safe space. And you know that this is your safe space. And I'm here for you no matter what. And how did you and Lawrence work to make sure that there were just always those little beats in between everything else?
Lawrence has such a wonderful way of expressing himself in a very subtle, physical way and emotional way. And I think that that's exactly what we both needed, because, their energies are different. Like his is a little bit more, I guess, frenetic, and hers is it can be seen as panicked, but it's also like a slower, more charged way of working because of her body breakdown. And I think that when that moment happens in the movie, it is unexpected for her. And I also think she wants to be a place where it's a soft landing for him. But she also, I think, indicates that she really just doesn't have the answers. Like I think in that moment, she's kind of just so taken aback and wants it to be fixed, right? It's this feeling of being a parent or being a friend or being a human being. Like you don't want to take any kind of suffering away. And she can't understand what he's going through because she doesn't even understand what the diagnosis is fully.
And it feels so connected to the moment where he goes missing for a few days and then she finds him again and he's just completely like mentally disassociated and he's not present. And the way that she's just like, you're my son, and just trying to ground him back to reality. And, what felt really important for you to try and have her connect to him in that moment, to do whatever she can to help bring him back into that mental space.
I think the reality of having someone that you love go missing for such a long time is there's an inescapable feeling of no control and I guess fear. And this, I think that's why oftentimes people who have family members or friends that go missing, you just want to know what you want to have a conclusion. You want to have some kind of finality so that you can feel like that person is in a safe space or somewhere there's a conclusion. And I think in that moment for me, seeing him was just this, it was like the air being let out of the balloon, because this building of days gone by looking and doing it on her own, like just going out there and stapling these missing posters, and also the judgment from the community and from that kind of societal point of view. Like she just didn't even care at that point. everything was like there was no way to hold all of that in anymore. She just had to let go of all of the hiding that she had been doing for so long. And I think there was, I guess, a sense of relief, but that sort of charged her again, like because she was so frail at that point.
And then there's the story that she's trying to piece together herself as she starts to see the websites that he's been looking and kind of the fascination that he develops with school shootings. And she has no idea if he's a harm to himself or others at this point. And again, just so alone in trying to navigate that and not knowing what tools to try and use to make things better. And what was that like going into a lot of those scenes and really just looking at what's everything that's whirling in her head, what's she constructing in her mind right now?
I think the detective work that she was doing was creating this sense of, you know, I guess the crescendo towards the end. And I think that tension build was what we needed to bring in order to, I mean, in some ways, even though it's based on a true story, the feeling of the movie is a little bit like a thriller because you don't know what's going to happen. And there has to be this feeling of time running out for there to be a real, it's like a ticking bomb of not just the time, but also emotionally and, the feeling of danger that she had that he was holding and what he could possibly do. So all of those, I guess, had to really engage in the right way in order for her to really, do what she finally did in the end.
And, in talking about some of those moments from towards the end of the film as well, when she receives the diagnosis that the chemotherapy that she was on isn't working and, she probably only has a few months. How for you did you find that news to be received by her? Because again, it feels like it's not so much about the impact it has for her. And it's how do I make sure that my son is going to be okay if I can't physically be here to take care of him?
I think I was really in the headspace I didn't really know what was going to happen when we shot that scene, and I wanted to leave it open and I trusted the process of what I had done before with the language, as I said earlier. And I really think that the moment that I had with Susie in that movie, I mean, who's a fantastic, beautiful actress, what I felt sort of like she was really hopeful, and she's had so much hope throughout the film. And I think the question that she posed when she says to her 1 year, and when she gives her the information that it's a matter of time, I wanted it to just be as present as possible. And I think that she's already in such a bad, state of, I guess, in her mind, she's grieving. There's so much loss. And now she feels, like you said, she doesn't prioritize herself, but she prioritizes her son. And that moment really is when the whole movie shifts. So emotionally, I was going to be available to whatever was going to happen. And we just did one take. Like, even if she just didn't even have a reaction, that would have been fine too. But what happened was organic.
And in talking about the choice that she makes at the very end and filming that moment, for watching the way that she just tries to hold everything so still and be so stoic in so many ways, to suddenly watch her make the choice that she does, and then just the level of grief where she physically can't even stand up. Did you have a sense of where you felt like you wanted to take the emotion going into that scene, or was that one where you really have to just step into it and see what happens in the moment?
That was something that I actually didn't remember anymore because it was so intense. And I remember because it was a real motel that we shot in. I walked into the room and I left again. And it took me a while to get back into the room because I knew that moment I walked in, I wasn't ready. And I think that I don't know how many times she must have not been ready herself. And so I didn't want to be false because that was really the most important place to me in the movie to show her love for her son in her way. And if it was false or inauthentic at all, it would have we would have not just lost the audience, but I would have I we would not be able to bring the movie, to life because it's such a powerful moment and it has to be, you know, based on what this woman did in real life to to make sure that her legacy is not something that is seen as monstrous. And I felt a really deep responsibility to that. And when I finally felt ready, we did it in one take, and it was an important moment, because in fact, what the editor said to me later, Joseph Krings, who was so fantastic, he said once he saw that scene, because we shot that towards the end, because we went to Los Angeles for that, they started from that moment and then worked backwards in the edit.
Yeah. Well, the intention of everything you just described really came forward in that moment, and you've done such a beautiful job with this role. So thank you so much for talking about it.
Oh, thanks, Mara. Thanks for watching it, and thanks for being so thorough. I mean, your questions are so precise, and I can say that we all appreciate, having that be felt and received in the way that you ask the questions, like all of us on the crew and the cast.
Thank you so much.